Today I'm talking Employment Rights Bill, the new legislation that's come in since Labour government came into power. And I'm going to be focusing on what you really need to know, not the scaremongering headlines that are out there, but actually reassuring you that this isn't as bad as it seems and we've got time to prepare. So if you're new to my channel, I'm Jenefer, I'm the founder of Silk Helix. We are a HR consultancy supporting businesses with all things HR, employment law, and we specialise in neurodiversity. There's nothing specifically neurodiversity about the Employment Rights Bill, but there are some overlaps which I will be covering in today's video. And this is really an introduction. The bill has just been announced. We've probably got 2 years before it's all in force. There's going to be a whole load of consultation. Things will change during that period. This is your introduction. It's the overview. It's the what to worry about now and what can we just park until we know a little bit more details. In terms of what are we going to park? Well, the key thing that I am parking today is the stuff around trade unions and collective bargaining. I'm going to focus in on this video on the individual rights that are affected by this bill, and there'll be other videos later on that look more at the trade union side, the impact of that. I think that's going to be a pretty big impact, the trade union side, but we need to look at it in more detail because it is pretty big. Trade unions are something that many people in HR nowadays haven't got experience of working with. Many industries just don't have trade union involvement, and I think that's potentially something that might change over the coming years. So we'll be parking that. That's all I'm going to say on that topic, and I will come back to it in later videos. In the meantime, I'm going to focus in on the individual rights that are coming in through this bill, the key things that you need to be aware of, and what kind of not to worry about. And I think the not to worry is my big overall message of this video. There's a lot of people out there, from the press to HR companies, that are really talking about massive employment law changes that you need to be really scared about. We even saw press reports of companies saying, we're going to stop hiring immediately because of this change. I think all of that is overdramatic. We don't need to be worrying, and the reality is we don't know all of the details yet. There's a lot of consultation periods going to be happening throughout 2025, and none of this legislation is going to be implemented before 2026. So we've got time to prepare for it, and some of this needs some big preparations and we need to start thinking about it now, but we also need to be prepared for things to change as that consultation happens and the details become more. So over the next 2 years, you will be seeing a lot of videos from me around this topic, amongst my other normal content as well. But the changes in legislation are going to have an impact, and it is something that we need to familiarise ourselves with. And we'll certainly be looking at how do we best support you out there watching these videos, but also our clients directly, and people who may want to come or need to come and work with us, because actually there's a new level, something else that needs to be implemented. And that might be something that we can work with you on in the next couple of years. So let's dive into some of the biggest changes that we're going to be seeing. Unfair dismissal, the biggest one, I think. I think this is going to have the most impact. It's the one that's got people the most scared. So at the moment, you can't bring an ordinary unfair dismissal claim unless you've got 2 years of service. Now, there is automatic unfair dismissals, and those claims can be brought from day one. So we are familiar with some day one unfair dismissals, but the change this makes is that we haven't got 2 years to assess, work out whether somebody is right for the role, and there will be some kind of process that's needed. So in theory at the moment, we can just say to someone, you're fired, like Lord Sugar Style, and that's it. Under 2 years, there's not much they can do about it unless it's for an automatic unfair reason. This will change, and we will be looking at processes that are needed, and it's going to be linked to probation periods. Now, if you've been watching my content, you'll see that I'm very anti-probation periods. I don't like the term probation, but hey, there's lots of terms in employment law I don't really like and don't think are that helpful. But probationary periods are going to be coming back. Now, at the moment, my advice, and I've kept all my videos up there around not having probationary periods because we're going to have 2 years to deal with this. So anyone that's been employed now is going to have 2 years service before they can bring an ordinary unfair dismissal claim. So all of that advice stands, but it's something we're watching very closely, and there may well be videos that I'm having to take down from the channel and change my advice with how we deal with this. The expectation is, or the government wants, a 9 months probationary period. That seems to be what they're favouring, but there is consultation around this, so this could change. That 9 months probationary period will be a period within which it is easier to dismiss. So it's likely that there will be a simpler dismissal process, not the full kind of ACAS process that we're currently following, that code of conduct. So it's likely to be a smaller process. But what it is really going to mean for employers is a real focus on designing an induction and probationary period that really does assess performance. And we've got to be careful with that, because if we go out there with this draconian assessment period, that's not a very welcoming environment. That's not going to be good for business. It's not going to be good for the long-term health of your teams and your employees. So it's going to have to be mirrored with a really solid induction period, focus on training, support, all the real positives. Because bear in mind, the vast majority of people will pass this probationary period. And I say pass like that because, again, I don't like this being an assessment period. I think that when people start a job, they should be welcomed into the team as if they're going to be great because you've hired them. If your recruitment's good, you should be hiring somebody who is a good fit for the team. And yes, occasionally things go wrong, but it's occasionally. The vast majority of people, we want to welcome into the team and get them up to the speed of doing a great job, feeling part of the team as quickly as possible. So a real solid design of your kind of induction and probation processes are going to be really important. And managers are going to need to have training on this. Because when I go back to before we had the 2 years, we had 1 year for a period of time, and the amount of calls at that time, I was working on an advice helpline, the amount of calls that we would get, which was, yeah, they've got to like 13, 14 months and we've just realised they're not working out and the manager hasn't done something about it. Or those that have had probationary periods, yeah, we sent them, you've passed probation letter, but actually we've now realised the manager hadn't managed any performance. And now we're realising they actually aren't performing. They're not doing what we need them to be doing. And that's going to be really problematic. So managers are going to need to be trained and there's going to need to be processes in there. And if you've watched my content, you'll know I don't like HR for HR's sake. I don't like forms and paperwork just for the sake of doing them. So we need to get these right to make sure that they're useful for the business. And with a focus, as I say, on people settling into their role and being really welcomed into the team. Now, I think that's the biggest one. It's certainly the one I think you'll see me talking about a lot because it is going to have a big impact. I don't think that businesses should be afraid to hire people. I think that's crazy. We all know that teams are what grow our businesses. That's crucial to us. So we shouldn't be afraid to hire people, but getting it right is going to be so important. Kind of in line with that, we will also be seeing an end to practices around fire and rehire. This is where employers will do a often large-scale dismissal of employees and then offer them a new employment, new contract with lesser terms and conditions. We've seen quite a bit of this coming out of COVID, and there's been a few big cases of this happening in recent years. So it was a headline really for the government to say they're going to be banning this. And yes, unscrupulous employers do use it inappropriately. So it's going to be banned with the exceptions of real situations where the business will not survive but for making this change. And then that's going to be really around securing jobs, and it's better to keep people in employment. So a fire and rehire is going to be much harder to do. We'll talk more about that as and when we get more information, but it's something to be aware of. During the election, we had a lot of Labour government talk around banning exploitative 0 hours contracts. That's a bit of a meaningless term. Like, what does that really mean? And really, it was a way for them to be able to talk about banning 0 hour contracts when really 0 hour contracts can work really well when individuals want them and they work for individuals. There's lots of situations where businesses really need 0-hour contracts. So I'm very much hoping that we don't see a full ban on 0-hour contracts. I think particularly for young people gaining experience, say through college, university, 0-hour contracts can be really beneficial. The events industry, 0-hour contracts are really important because things do go up and down genuinely according to the needs of the business. And there's some industries where people want to be able to pick and choose their employer and may have multiple 0-hour contracts with different employers where they can go and take work where they need it. And these are not exploitative. These are contracts that work for the individual and are what the individual is looking for. But on the other side to that, there's many 0-hour contracts that are issued when they really shouldn't be, when it really isn't 0 hours, the person is working regular hours, but the employer wants to be able to remove shifts at the last minute. Often somebody will be on their way to work told, no, you're not needed at work today and you're not going to get paid for that. Obviously, that's got financial implications to individuals. And it's these sorts of practices that I think we're going to be seeing banned from these contracts. And it's more likely to be a case where employees will be able to ask for guaranteed hours and will be able to have longer periods of notice, say for changes in shifts and things like that. But again, a period of consultation planned for this, so we'll get more details as it comes. And again, this is something we'll be looking at really closely because for some businesses, particularly in industries like hospitality, 0-hour contracts are really important and really make the businesses tick. But it's a case of really looking at, do we really need a 0-hour contract here, and does it work for both parties, or is there an alternative we could be looking at? Sexual harassment and the prevention of sexual harassment looks to be tightened up even further, with reasonable steps being moved to all reasonable steps, and the explicit introduction of third party. Now, third party prevention has been in and out of the legislation, or talked about being in and out of the legislation a number of times. And it's really challenging, particularly industries like hospitality, to be able to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, particularly where you're serving members of the public alcohol. It has major problems. And this is where, yes, employers should be doing everything they can to protect and keep their staff safe. But there is a limit to what can be done in an industry where serving alcohol to members of the public is what you do. So I think this is probably the biggest challenge for third-party harassment. And the hospitality industry, I think, have got a big impact actually from this bill with 0 hours as well. So it's something for them to be watching. For everybody else, certainly when we're doing sexual harassment training, we're mentioning third parties anyway, and my advice to employers is to consider it. If you've got a member of your team who is being harassed by a third party and you can do something to stop it, why wouldn't you? That's my biggest question to an employer. So for a lot of industries where third parties is a relatively small or low risk, maybe it's contractors, maybe it is members of the public or customers, but on a kind of smaller scale, or there's no alcohol involved, or just different scenarios make the risks lower, then my advice would be that this is something that employers should be considering now anyway, and it's certainly something that we look at as part of sexual harassment training when we're delivering it. But it is something that for those employers, like in hospitality, be aware that this might be being tightened up. Again, we've got consultation around it, so let's see what happens on this one, because it's been something that's been talked about over the years. It did go into the Equality Act originally, third-party harassment, and then it got removed. So let's see what happens on that one. There's some additional protections coming. So flexible working, for example, there's going to be some strengthening of the requirement for employers to give reasons for declining requests. It's not actually a huge change, I don't think. This one's a little bit watered down from probably what was expected by some people. I don't think it's going to have a major impact. There's also going to be some increased protections for those on maternity and paternity leave, and potentially some day one rights to parental leave and paternity leave coming in as well. I don't think these are going to make huge difference to employers. At the moment, those rights are from 26 weeks service, and payments are low or zero for parental leave anyway, so uptakes has been relatively low too, so I don't think that's going to have a major impact on employers. But again, watch this space as the consultation comes, and we'll be talking about that more. And the final one to really highlight is bereavement leave. So at the moment, the only bereavement leave we've got where there's a right to time off is for parents who lose a child. Bereavement leave is an interesting one because as over the years, as I've done training and we've talked about, well, what have you got a statutory right to time off for and what haven't? People are always really shocked to find that there's no statutory right to time off for bereavement. Only recently has parental bereavement leave come in. So this is something that's come as a shock, but actually in my experience, probably hasn't come into legislation because most employers do it anyway. So it's not something I think is going to have a massive impact on employers. There'll be a few. And perhaps these are employers that probably need employment legislation a little bit more because really, why would you want somebody in work who is bereaved? We know that bereavement has a massive impact on people. And I have seen situations where people have gone to their doctor and been signed off work for bereavement. So it does have a massive impact on people and it has different impacts on different people's circumstances vary widely as well. So I've always encouraged employers to have policies that allow for discretion, allow managers to work with individuals and work with how we support people through these things. When we support people through the toughest times in their lives, and bereavement is one of the toughest times in their lives, it comes back to us. And that is not just from the individual. So that individual will remember that their employer looked after them when they needed it. And that has huge impacts on morale, motivation, productivity. It's all good for business. And not just for that individual, but the others in the team too. Because if I'm in a team with somebody and I've seen that they're going through a really tough time and I see that they get supported, that has a big impact on me too. And it makes me feel like I've got some safety here, that things are okay. And that if I hit the toughest times, I will also get that support too. So bereavement, I think, is something employers should be doing now. We need to watch this space for the full details of what this will mean in the Employment Rights Bill through the consultation and when this comes into force. But it's absolutely something I think all employers should be doing and should be working with individuals on. So right now, my key takeaways are don't panic. I think that's really important to say that this legislation, each of these changes are not going to come into force before 2026. We've got 2 years to plan for this. More details are going to come out. So we will need those 2 years because as the consultation happens, as the details come out, things will change and we will know more information and that's going to help us plan. In terms of planning and preparation, I think the biggest thing right now to be looking at is these unfair dismissals and how we manage and support people through induction and probationary periods. Part of the reason I think to look at it right now is that for many, this is going to need upskilling of managers, and that's not just going to be upskilling for dealing with probationary periods, but actually more wider benefits in terms of performance management, absence management, managing reasonable adjustments, supporting people. I think there's going to be some real benefits if we get this right, some real benefits across the sort of equality, diversity, inclusion space and how we support and have more inclusive teams. I think there's a lot of business benefits to gain from really putting effort into induction processes that I don't think for many businesses has been high on the agenda despite the business benefits of it. So if I was advising where to start, for me that would be the starting point, to be looking at what can we be doing and where could this be improved within our business, because any improvements you make are going to be good for business, even if you don't make all of the changes like probationary periods, cut off at 9 months, things like that could change in the future. But being prepared, start the planning process, start looking at what is it you need, because these could be fairly big changes that a business is going to need. We will be talking a lot more about that. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos on it. It's something I find really interesting, that topic, so it's definitely something I'll be looking at, and we'll be sharing more and more ideas on what you can do to make your induction and probationary periods really solid. Thank you for watching. If you're wanting to keep up to date, then do hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because I will be putting out new videos every week, and there will be a lot more to come on this area, as well as just more widely all things HR, employment law and neurodiversity.